All right, good to get started then. Okay. Good morning. Hello, I'm Jeremy Goodsell. I'm a sixth-year PhD student in the Institute of Optics and an NSF AR/VR PhD fellow. Thank you for joining us this morning for Voices of XR with Lieutenant Colonel Stephanie Raffo. This series is made possible by Kathy McMorran Murray and the National Science Foundation as part of the interdisciplinary graduate training in science, technology, and applications of augmented and virtual reality at the University of Rochester. I'd like to thank Lieutenant Colonel Stephanie Raffo for joining us today. Lieutenant Colonel Stephanie Raffo is the Director of Innovation at the Headquarters Space Operations Command at Peterson Space Force Base in Colorado. She leads the Innovation Directorate, delivering software and hardware solutions for Space Force operational missions and fostering the innovative culture across the command. Prior to her current assignment, she led a 6-member team as an operations officer in technical analysis and development of weapon systems, and authored more than 100 technical reports at the Munitions Directorate, Eglin Air Force Base. At Schriever Air Force Base, she led a 14-satellite constellation valued at more than $3.5 billion in support of 200,000 users. Additionally, Lieutenant Colonel Stephanie Raffo challenged 234 cadet candidates in academics and the military profession at the United States Airforce Academy. She was an instrumental coach on leadership and character lessons for more than 1,000 cadets. Finally, Lieutenant Colonel Stephanie Raffo led the Commander's Action Group and the executive staff for the Air Reserve Personnel Center Commander, ensuring force support to 1.3 million Air Force active duty, reserve, and Guard personnel worldwide. Please feel free to post your questions in the chat and we'll have a Q&A. Lastly, the session is being recorded and will be available to you later on the Studio X website. With that, I'll turn it over to Lieutenant Colonel Stephanie Raffo.
Awesome. Thank you, Jeremy. Can everybody hear me? Yeah, good. Okay, awesome. Perfect. Well, thank you so much for the university to have me as a speaker. I am honored. I've been looking through the University of Rochester website and I'm very impressed. Even some of your videos and showcases on your website show AR, VR. How exciting is that? I wish I had that when I went through school. We definitely did not. Not even close. So we have plenty of time today. I have my notes, so if you see me looking down, I just want to make sure I'm not missing anything. But again, please feel free to put questions, comments in the chat. I have the chat open, so as we go, I'm happy to address your questions or comments there. So I just definitely want to make sure that it's more of a discussion than me just chatting with you there. Nice. Air Force New York's here. Yeah, perfect. Okay, so I'm gonna do one of those things. I see squirrels and I just get distracted. Okay, perfect. So let me talk to you a little bit about the Space Force in case folks need a little bit of background. But then I'll talk about myself, my background, and then how we're doing AR, VR. Not only in my past, but how I'm seeing that in the Space Force and how that's become pretty awesome technology for us. So if folks don't know, Space Force, it was stood up in December of 2019, brand new service underneath the Department of the Air Force. That was huge for us. That was huge because we wanted to divorce ourselves from the Air Force so we can have our own resources and our own personnel dedicated to Space Force, to space operations. Just to give you an idea, the Air Force itself has about almost 660,000 federal employees. That means civilians, military, where the Space Force only has like 25,000. So we're about not even 4% of what the Air Force has. So we're super small. We're super small. And we want to keep it that way because we want to be lean and agile, right? We don't want a bunch of layers within our force. We want to keep it so we can move fast and be agile that way. So that gives you an idea of how small we are. That means also our bandwidth is tapped out, right? Like we have so many things going on and we provide all the space effects across the world, right? So think about like the normal, like GPS, right? Where you have your navigation. We provide that worldwide for all our users. It's 4 billion users for navigation across the world. We also provide communications for our federal employees, right? We want to make sure that as we're going around the world, we have that ability to communicate. It's crucial and it's very important. Not only for our operations and not just the Space Force, it's for all the military services and DoD wide, right? We want to make sure we provide that. Without that, we can't communicate as effectively. And obviously we provide within the Space Force a lot of operations. We're Intel focused, we are Intel led and informed, and we are cyber secured. So I tell you all these things that they're not small. These are big tasks that we have with such a lean force, but we're doing it fairly well, I must say. Not that I do it all on my own, of course. So, you know, I'm very proud of the Space Force and what they've become. I'm still Air Force. If you can see my tags here, I'm still in the Air Force. I just support the Space Force. I've supported them in the past, and I'll talk about that in my background. But I support them now with innovation, and it's just been thrilling, and I can't wait to talk to you about it. So any questions at all? I'm still looking at the chat to make sure I'm not missing anything. Let's see. Okay. All right. So let me tell you a little bit of a background on myself and how I got here, basically. So born and raised in Argentina, so not even from the States, although obviously I'm a citizen. Born and raised there, my parents, no military background at all. So when we moved to the States, I was about maybe 8 or 9. Knew zero English, but you know, that was a challenge, of course. So, but along the way, it was the best move my parents could make for everybody in the family. So that was great. I was very into nature and biology and the science part of the world. So I went into the University of South Florida to get my degree in biology. And I tell you some of these things because you don't necessarily end up using the degree that you're in. So if you're worried and panicking about what major you're looking after, don't panic. Just do what you're passionate about. I was passionate about biology. Whether or not I was going to do that as a marine biologist, that came across my mind once or twice. It's okay as long as you love what you're learning. That's always what I told myself, what I told my students in the past. I've been an instructor. I'll get into that. So that's okay. You can always relearn new things some other time. Things change, so don't panic about that. Let's see. So undergrad in biology, master's in forensic science, and all about dissertation in forensic psychology. So you can see that my shift in education has changed into forensics as I focused a little bit more, because again, that's what I was passionate about. That's what I wanted to learn. So, you know, in between there, I joined the Air Force, and it was probably one of my best decisions I've made as far as a career. It's led me to a lot of different things, for me to see a lot of different things and experience so many different scenarios. And, you know, we told the same thing. Leadership is huge, what you get out of the services. And this is not a recruiting thing. You do not have to go into the military service. But for me, it was pretty big. And I definitely have appreciated the Air Force and the Space Force for everything that was provided to me as an experience. So a little bit of background. So I came in, by the way, as a chemist in the Air Force. So my undergrad was biology, but the Air Force said, hey, by the way, you're going to be a chemist. good thing I've had some chemistry classes. They came in handy. So basically working in Florida, doing chemistry and looking at different materials of what we could use in the military. What would be more effective, what would be safe to use both on the military side and the civilian side. We definitely don't want to be hurting folks as we're using materials. So, chemists, my career has gone like all kinds of different directions. After being a chemist for quite a while over at Florida, I joined the Space Command back in the day before Space Force was stood up. And I did a space operations basically for satellite communications, which was very thrilling. Again, the leadership aspects came right off the bat, leading a team to cover satellite communications for global effects. So the responsibility there is pretty large. That was very fruitful. Did a evaluation aspect of the job as well to make sure that folks are proficient in their operations, to make sure that they're okay to run satellite systems. And then, my career again went like that. And I went over to the academy here in Colorado Springs to teach the cadets. And that's part of what you heard during my introduction there. So fruitful. As an instructor, the best piece, the best part was seeing the students click when they got a topic, right? I was a chemistry instructor, right? Because I'm a chemist. So you see your students struggle, right? Because they're trying to learn the material. But then there's this wonderful part where they just get it on their own and you watch them just start understanding what they've learned. So that was incredibly fruitful for me and taught me a lot of patience. It taught me a lot of patience with students, right? Because it's a struggle for students too when they're not grasping an idea. So I say for the staff that's on the call too, it's got to be about the patience and letting them come to the conclusion and letting them come to the answer. You can't just feed them the answer; they'll never learn that way. So great assignment. And then fast forward a little bit. I went to school, I was a student, and then I taught again. And then I'll talk about a little bit of that because we did a little bit of AR, VR when I did my second assignment as an instructor. And then I'm here, right? So I got this job, the Director of Innovation over at Headquarters Space Operations Command in June of 21. So I've been in the seat almost 2 years. I can tell you I stood up the directorate from the ground up. And I'm not saying that as a, look at me, I'm saying that as a, wow, we've come such a long way from almost nothing to now we're focused on innovation. And that's incredible in the span of 2 years. So I have a team of, right now, I have a team of 9, and that's including myself. So you can see, again, very lean, agile force. So my folks are in charge of taking care of making sure that the space deltas, basically our sub-organizations, that they're taken care of for innovation. So they get after a lot of software development, which is what we want, right? We want them to automate as much as they possibly can. So it makes their life a lot easier. How terrible would it be to hand jam information on Excel sheets or Word documents or reports when you can have automated tools that can just do that for you? So that's what we try to get after. For the last 2 years, after figuring out what we needed to do for the Space Force and for my command, that was the best route, is to look for mostly software applications that can help our operators. So any questions on that? I know I'm fast forward. Let's see, great advice. I have a degree in English, but have always been interested in computers. Yes, keep doing English if you love it. keep doing English if you love it. If you change and want to do computers, you can always get certificates on computers or get classes on the side. Totally great. Do what you prefer, whatever passion you have. Or even a side business with computers. You can even do that. Let's see. All right, so I want to talk to you a little bit about AR/VR because I want to leave a lot of time for y'all to tell me what you've been working on with AR/VR as well. Because we work with innovation, we work with a lot of mission partners, which includes academia. So part of us even discussing innovation with mission partners like yourselves, the University of Rochester and other universities, it's a great partnership either around whether we do partnership or not, that's completely fine. But I'm so interested to know where you guys are going with AR/VR. Just to have an idea, maybe I could inject something in the Space Force that you guys have come up with that I haven't even thought of. So happy to talk about that. All right, let's dive into AR/VR. So for my second assignment as an instructor, like I mentioned, I was over at Alabama. And I was teaching captain levels. So they're basically mid-20s folks that have been in the military. They're mostly at that time were Air Force. There were sprinkled in a few inter-services, so like Marines, Navy, all that, but very few. But mostly Air Force captains that we've instructed, and that's basically their professional development course that they must run through when they hit the captain level, right? We want our force, our military overall to be professionally developed. This is one of the courses that the Air Force provides, and we expect our captains to go through it. Basically, talk about and learn about leadership, followership, strategy, all kinds of different agendas that we had, or at that time that we had for our captains to learn. And it's a lot of discussion-based environment. So for my classes, it was a rotation of classes year-round, and I had maybe about 15-ish students in each class. And that was perfect because you want to be able to enable discussions. When we're talking about leadership, followership, again, strategy, what's the national strategy? How does that relate to them in the armed services? And how they need to understand those strategies because they're the ones executing that strategy. On top of that, we started adding at that time, and I'm certain that they're still running with it, we've injected Oculus, so the AR/VR type, the VR type of equipment that we were able to get at the school for our captains, and that was great because you always want your students to have hands-on experience as well. You can't just have like a talk. You want them to experience something. So part of us injecting the VR headsets at the school was, okay, what type of scenario do we want to push them through? And we talked through it, and we thought at the time the best scenario would be let's do a type of combat scenario. And what I mean by that, and I'll give you what I can remember from that scenario that we discussed, was basically you go downrange, you go overseas, and you have a small team that you're in charge of. So in the scenario, the student that puts the Oculus on is the supervisor of this small team. And let's throw in some personnel issues in the mix, because you never know when you might have discipline issues in your team, where you might have other issues, equipment, lack of resources. You want to give them challenges to think through. So the scenario was they have a small team, they're a supervisor of a small team, and they're downrange, and they have to basically do their rounds, possibly closely collaborate with the local community. That's also very important to understand the cultures and to make sure that that we present a professional and collaborative kind of manner, right, behavior. So why I tell you what the scenario is about is because it was so incredible seeing my students go through the scenario, and the scenario only took like maybe 20 minutes with, going through that, hey, this is your intro to your scenario, this is where you are, this is where you're landing, this is who your team is, just get to know them. The outbrief of their experience was amazing. And you can see the value of adding the VR into the school. I had quite a few students, talk about, hey, my troop, my airmen, they were acting, I'm not sure why they made decisions they made in the scenario, like what happened. I was like, well, let's talk about it, because every decision that you make as a supervisor affects this team in that scenario. So every student had a slightly different outcome. And that was because of the decisions they made within the scenario as a supervisor. So let's talk about the second and third order effects of what your decisions as a supervisor created. So again, we threw in the personnel issues, throw in a bad apple, bad troop in there and see how they handle discipline. If the student in the scenario didn't address the discipline issues prior to a mission, that ended up in negative results, because you want to make sure you're addressing concerns from your troops, concerns from your airmen, in order to have a positive, cohesive team when you're doing missions. So the outbrief, the outcomes, the conversations that we have from the VR experience, they loved it. They loved it because some of them have had combat experience, and even then I would have never thought to address XYZ. I would have never thought to do this piece, because I could see how me disregarding this little piece ended up in a bigger result that I didn't want in the future. Definitely a good VR experience. Oh, there's a question. How was the training usually handled before the VR? Great question. So if we're talking about leading them up to the VR experience, is that what potentially?
I meant more like before you had VR as an option.
Oh, great. Yeah, before we even had VR as an option. To be honest, we just talked about leadership, followership, and like what would be the right things to do and right things to talk about. But even us as instructors, we could very well miss certain things that we want to talk about. So having that VR allowed an automated type of scenario where they just handled it on their own. They had that experience on their own, and we all gathered back up and go, okay, you all started with the same scenario, but you all ended up with different outcomes. Let's talk about that. Definitely did not have that opportunity before VR. Absolutely not. We try, get the students out to the local area to do other, lessons. We talked about change management and leading change. So in Montgomery, we were there with all the Freedom Rider museums and milestones there. So that was an easy way to have them experience and to look at the real world applications But with the VR, you know, we didn't have to go downrange. We didn't have to go anywhere. We were right there and we were able to make that scenario, and it was so valuable. I'm fairly certain they still have the VR equipment that they're still using. That's a great question. Okay, so for as far as the instructor piece, that was incredibly valuable for them to realize, like, wow, maybe I'm not as a great, you know, supervisor just yet. You know, you always learn as a leader, always, no matter what rank you are and how high up the chain you are. But it just gives them that other opportunity to realize, oh, I need to think about this a little bit more as a leader. So that was great. But let me tell you what we're using AR/VR for in the Space Force. Yes, serious games as well offer a safe sandbox. Absolutely. Absolutely. Again, you just have it right there. You don't have to go out and do that same scenario. Yes. Let me tell you how AR/VR is used in the Space Force right now. Like I mentioned, Directorate of Innovation stood up almost 2 years ago, right? So this concept of innovation, we've been forming it as a force as we go, because we don't know what we don't know yet. There's certain things that we know we want automation, we know we want AI, ML to help us with operations, and we're getting after those things. But as far as AR/VR, let's talk about how do we utilize this? How do we leverage this technology for the Space Force? And you know, I mentioned that in the headquarters Space Operations Command, we have 2 other sister commands within the Space Force. One of the sister commands deals with training, and we collaborate all the time with our sister commands, by the way, because what are you doing for innovation? Maybe I want to do that for innovation. Maybe we can collaborate and pool resources together. You know, that's a smart way of doing it. So our sister command that deals with training has paired up with the Air Force Academy here in the Springs to get after an AR/VR initiative. And if you haven't connected it yet, for training, almost like learning, right? Almost like instructing, almost like as a student. Understanding the space environment is actually quite difficult, at least to me. There's the orbital environment, all the orbits. There's the different, I wouldn't call it atmosphere. I would call it just the environment of space is obviously very different from the one here on Earth, and how things move, how fast they move. You know, avoiding colliding different satellites with each other, avoiding colliding with the International Space Station. So everything has to come into play. There's a lot of physics behind that. And what our sister command, who deals with training, has come up with this initiative of AR/VR for better education, for learning the space environment. So they just talked to me 2 weeks ago about their initiative, and wow, I'm impressed. I'm impressed because they have both AR and VR that they've adopted. Because they want to try out both, right? Some folks get really dizzy with the VR concept, right? The VR where you have the big glasses and you're in this environment and you're looking around and you have, let's say you have the globe of Earth and then you have all the satellite systems around it and how that fits into the overall environment. And by the way, the moon's over here and all that. So they wanted to add the augmented reality because it allows that environment to come into your physical world, right? So it just introduces it into your physical space, and that you can learn how to look at that space environment in a different way. Same concept is all about learning the basically the orbits, the speeds, all the physics that goes behind it. So when they talked to me about their initiative, I was incredibly impressed, you know, teaching orbital dynamics and having that orbital space lessons that they do, and taking that from paper, from actual paper. And, you know, we've had, you know, videos that kind of talk about, oh, this is, you know, the orbital XYZ, from actual paper and videos into an immersive environment, which is really all we ever want for our students. That's exactly why we added VR to when I was an instructor back in the day, right? So that's all we want, is for our students to have a better experience when they're learning their topics. It goes into collision avoidance. So again, making sure that, how do I understand as a space operator what collision avoidance is, to make sure that satellites don't collide with each other. And by the way, that's not just US assets, that's every asset. We don't want to collide with anybody else. That ruins the space environment for everybody, right? So we all benefit if we ensure that we're not colliding with each other. So how do I understand the physics behind that? How do I understand launching satellites into space, and how and when do I need to launch, right? So it's all about learning how to use that space, literally how to use space. And also threats. So they're injecting threat scenarios in there as well, to make sure, hey, you know, we always talk about wargaming and threats, and what do threats look like to our assets? And how do we see that within an AR VR environment? So fairly new initiative. They launched it last year in 2022, but they've come a long way. And I'm excited to see that actually starting to be injected into their training. I think that's going to be huge. And I feel like the Air Force and other services might follow suit. Because it's definitely a different experience for our students. There's a question. Okay, how much stuff or what should someone know before applying to be in the Space Force? Depends. If you're passionate about working with space assets and doing space operations, you don't necessarily need a whole lot of background. The Space Force will teach you. It would be ideal to have maybe some kind of science background, but you don't necessarily have to. It depends also if you want to be an officer versus enlisted. Enlisted don't need degrees. Officers are required to have degrees. So you can think about it both ways. Do you need a strong physics background, or will it be taught when joining? You don't, but it helps. It absolutely helps, because it helps you understand, again, like I was talking about, that orbital environment. To me, not having a strong physics background, I was still able to learn it, but there's a lot of areas where it's not my expertise. And we have folks that are experts in that have become experts in that, and they deal with the physics piece behind everything. I do not, which is completely fine with me. But you don't need a strong physics background. It's totally up to you. Let's see. So again, very excited about what our sister command is doing. And again, we share innovations to make sure that anything that we automate on our side, on our sister, on our command, we share it with others. There's no point in gatekeeping innovations within the Space Force. We're so lean, and we have a limited amount of resources. And of course, we want to ensure that we're using our resources responsibly and to the best ability possible in order to get after the effects that we want. And that the Air Force and that the Space Force and that the US should have, right? We're supporting the US as a whole and our allies. So, okay, I think I'm a little short on time, like I'm a little early, but I wanna make sure I leave enough time for questions. I wanna know what you are doing. I think that's amazing. If you're all tapping into AR, VR, oh, there's another question. When trying out different technologies, what feature have most been beneficial? On the flip side, what advantages would you like to see? Ooh, that's a good question. Can you share specifics, devices? I tried Oculus, not that I'm promoting any company or any brand. So the only experience I have with the AR, VR, or really the VR, has been the Oculus. So I'm actually going to be going to USAFA, the Academy here, to try out their new AR VR, because I'm curious to see what they have and how that differs from my experience back in the day. Let's see. What has been most beneficial features? Ooh, I gotta tell you, the VR that we had when I was an instructor, and I tried it, of course, you always want to try it as an instructor because you want to be prepared for what your students are experiencing. Very realistic, very realistic. So I get motion sickness, and for sure, when I was in an aircraft, it was in a combat scenario. It definitely, even just sitting there with my goggles on. I mean, I'm admitting that, so don't share that with anybody. So that was very realistic. The fact that the features allow you to have that realistic experience, I think that's completely beneficial. What advantages would I like to see? Whew. I'm sure we've come a long way, but maybe a more realistic on the avatars that are in the scenarios. They were really good back then. I would be shocked if they're not even better today. I think that just adds to the realistic environment. Okay, let's see. I believe many people believe AR, VR to be faddish technology, primarily used for entertainment. Let's see, and not training tool for the military. In your opinion, what do you think are the required next steps to allow AR, VR to become a strategic technology? Oh, it's a good question. Respect to military history. Okay. I don't think there's not pushback. Usually when you have a Department of Defense, there might be some pushback for new things. Especially we want to make sure we're responsible with our funding and our resources. But the fact that we're leveraging so many different technologies to make us that more agile, and that more, not lethal, but more effective. The Space Force has been leaning so much on, let's leverage the technology we can. Absolutely, because we want to do things smarter. We are a lean force. We don't have the numbers that Air Force has. And we are responsible for providing all these space effects. We need to depend on technology. So the next steps to allow AR, VR to become a strategic technology for military training, that's coming along just fine. Our sister command who deals with training, their initiative, they're just pushing through doing use cases. Our higher headquarters, so the folks above us, are talking about, hey, what are the options for AR, VR, and how do we use potentially this training piece as a use case? And even looking across the Air Force and other military services, what use cases can we look at? And how do we do things smart, right? Because we don't want to recreate the wheel. We want to tap into other services, see what they've been doing and what works and what doesn't work. I don't think it's a hard stretch to add AR, VR into training. Not at all. And overall in military training, if you're talking about basic training when folks come in, definitely. I don't see why not. The leadership experience scenarios that even I taught back in the day, that can be used for regular military training when folks come in. Again, military is not about like, let's just be all fit and work out and shoot guns. It's really, you become leaders no matter what rank you are. And we professionally develop our force, our cadre. So at the end of the day, we're all leaders that are part of this team. And again, we support the U.S. and our allies, and we want to make sure we have the best folks in our forces. I don't see it as a big stretch. I think it might be even a reality within the next couple of years, depending. Let's see. See what other questions. Do I have experience with the ones being used in F-35s? I don't. I wish I did. I don't. So I'm not going to be able to talk about that piece. Let's see. I'm curious about how Space Force is handling privacy and data concerns with some of these VR headsets, such as Oculus. It's been a big challenge for us. The headsets collect the enormous, I lost the question, the enormous amount of user data. How the Space Force military navigate these issues. I'm curious about what the privacy data would be included. Not sure if we can expand on that.
So the headsets collect user data, like it does eye tracking. There's microphones on the headset that do voice recognition. There's cameras on it, and I can imagine, especially for the military, that you have a lot of very sensitive data. And so we've been, trying to make sure all of our users and especially libraries are thinking about these issues and trying to communicate about them. And I just, I'm wondering if, how you're all dealing with these issues.
Okay, that's a great question. I don't think I've heard of any issues yet with data. As far as we've been using them thus far, it's been for training purposes. So with that, it's just been the information from the headsets have stayed within the schoolhouse. There's, we have our systems that are cyber secure. So anything that we plug in or use, we ensure that it has cybersecurity involved with it. So either we're working with our vendors to do that, or we have, authorized cyber experts that bless the equipment, basically. But if we start using this, the technology for operations or anything, expanding where we have more sensitive information, I think that leads into more questions and more certifications to make sure that the equipment is good to use. We would never put our information at risk, but for right now, training is a huge value to add the technology. It's a great question. See, if cadets in ROTC field training are divided into those interested in Space Force and Air Force, what do you think training for Space Force cadets would look like? Oh, that is a good question. To be honest, other than maybe perhaps the uniform, I think your training should be quite the same for training, for field training. Within the question, right? So field training is basically your basic training. That's where you apply your leadership skills that you've learned thus far. You give that opportunity to lead a small team, march them around, leading your folks to ensure that they have the equipment for field training, all of that. I think it's a lot of leadership involved with field training. So I don't see a whole lot of big difference other than maybe Space Force. I would imagine that we would join the Air Force's basic training and field training. I don't think we would make our own, although that's Steph's opinion. I think, again, with such a lean force, I think it would be smart to leverage our Department of the Air Force. Can you expand a bit on how you work with or are interested in working with universities on AR/VR? Yes. So for example, for the local area, we work with the University of Colorado on innovation. So not necessarily AR/VR, although we're always peeling back the onion, right? Because if they have students in innovation, they're interested in working with innovations within the space realm. And again, it's only about if the students are passionate about what they're learning. We would never force a collaboration or a partnership. But if there are universities that have experience or initiatives or efforts with AR/VR, it's always interesting to see what they're coming up with. But because again, we're not perfect, and we're not coming up with every possible use of AR/VR. And why we leverage mission partners and universities and academia, because there's so many smart folks and so many passionate folks, and younger generations that can think of brilliant things that I would never have thought of. That we always want to be able to tap into how you as universities would think about the technology. And it could be a great partnership. We would have, agreements between us, like, and it's just very basic, like, hey, we're looking to partner or collaborate, just really simple language, collaborate with a university. We'll love to see what you have, if there's an opportunity to work with space as interns or that type of like academia leverage, then we would have that. Let's see, as an example, our AR/VR PhD program, our training program, which is amazing. You have an AR/VR PhD program. I'm thrilled. See, we never had that. That's amazing. Okay, where students team develop solutions and real problems. That's amazing. Might that be of interest? Of course. If you all are tapping into space, right? If you're tapping into the space realm, if you're not, no big deal. We can always still talk about how you're using the technology, because again, maybe we haven't thought of a way that we're leveraging the technology. Maybe there's a different way. It's amazing that you guys have this PhD program. Oh man, I'm so excited. I wish I could become a student again, to go to university to learn something completely different than what I've learned. In my experience as a student back in, I don't know, the early 2000s was, I'm certain it will be a different experience than what you're having today. Oh man, I don't know how I'm doing on time. I'm not sure when we're ending. Are we still good on time? Let's see.
Yeah, we're still good on time. I think we have a hand raised, so go ahead and unmute.
Oh, go ahead.
Well, thank you, Stephanie. I'm Ramadas. I'm a professor here in the Department of Orthopedics. Thank you for the talk. Sorry, I missed the first 15 minutes. I was in another Zoom call. But let me ask you about some rehabilitation protocols you're using the VR for. Are you using the VR for some anxiety protocols, fear, part of a rehab process, or this is mainly purely for training and simulation?
Okay. Yeah, that's such a great question. See, this is why I love talking to university folks, because you guys come up with the greatest question I would have never thought of. How amazing would it be to use AR/VR for like behavioral sciences and talking into the psych piece of things? Right now, it's just training. But I can tell you, at least from when I did VR with my students, there's a little bit of psych into that scenario, right? Because we put them virtually in a combat scenario, and where that hits people differently. It's always good to see how folks respond to that type of scenario, even if it's virtual, even if it's just to talk about it. How did you feel about that? We are military, but we do talk about our feelings. So how did that make you feel? Like, what was going through your head, and why did you respond the way you did? And there's no wrong answer. Let's just talk about it.
Yeah.
So that's a great question.
So we have our sport medicine program over here, and just disclaimer, I'm also I'm Israeli military. I'm a background. So I also, familiar with all situation and training. I mean, great potential, great work. But get back to my questions. We have our sport medicine program, very developed. We actually have a bunch of ODE grants or working with firefighters, and we have our psychologists working with us. And we're doing a bunch of simulation in a VR room that we have, and really have, while we're taking the simulation, a psychologist standing next to them and all these like models and theory basically into the head and how to, react and behave in very stressful situation, because this one for new, especially in boot camps and new soldiers, it's going to be very stressful. Or even like, post-trauma after you get back from the battle, right? You don't want to talk, don't want to do anything, but sometimes visualize some stuff may help you to open up and help you with the rehabilitation and the recovery process. This is something that we're hoping to do over here with you or without you, but it's just an idea. I'm wondering if you guys are doing anything about it.
Yeah, this is exactly why we partner with different folks too. If it comes down to it, even if we don't have an agreement with University of Rochester, it'd be so great to come out and even just see what you guys are doing. I think that would be just so great, beneficial, even for the discussion. But just right now, it's just training. But I love the psych aspect to that. And again, like putting them into scenarios and even post scenarios and how people respond to that or how they feel about that.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Looking forward to work with you. Thank you.
Yeah. All right, let's see. Yes, we have researchers that are working with using VR to understand anxiety and PTSD. Love that. I would love to know how you're doing that. I wonder if our psych folks, as part of the Air Force and Space Force, if they tapped into that technology. That would be curious to see. I'm not an expert in that field, but wow, what benefit that would bring. Kudos to the team. Yes, PhD. And there's a link. Awesome. Perfect. Awesome. Okay. And I see, I'm going to start. I see a name that I recognize, and I just want to point it out if y'all are okay with that. Zach Lamarca, are you the same Zach Lamarca I'm thinking of? And you would know if I am. I'm going to put you on the spot. Yes. Oh my gosh. So story time. So Zach used to be at the Academy for the Air Force, and I used to be his instructor. And what's amazing about that, and he went up and to the cadet world, and I was a sponsor for a little while, and he had whether or not he was going to stay at the Academy, I encouraged him to do what he wanted to do. I lost touch with Zach a little bit, but how amazing is it that what a small world that still the best instructor I've ever had. Get out of here. So amazing to see you, Zach. Sorry, I can't see your face, but love that you're here in that such a small world. It's so good to virtually see your name. Serious games started from the U.S. military immersive. Okay, we are used to training and education, but there's lots of research and behavioral stuff too. Yes, perfect. Okay. Awesome. Okay. I think we still have just a few more minutes. If anybody has any other questions or comments, again, I'll keep tabs with the staff here, and then if we are able to come out for a visit, just to visit, we'll love to do that. I'll get some of my folks and maybe we can just join in on conversations. Awesome.
I have one more question. So when you're developing the VR training simulations, what's the process for doing? Like, how do you determine, okay, if our user makes this decision, this will be the consequence? Is that based on, do you just have other folks that have been in similar situations come up with that? Do you poll folks to do that? And then also the technology behind it is all stuff you develop yourselves, or do you go to third-party vendors and ask them, like, this is what we'd like, and can you build it for us? Oh
man, these are such great questions. I was not part of the hands-on deck team that built everything out. I was only here are my thoughts and go execute type of level. So it was more of a, I think, I don't want to guess, but I think to a degree it was a little bit of both. It was both with working with potentially a vendor and them providing potential outcomes that created those scenarios. But that might be a stretch. I'm not completely 100% on that. But good question. Sounds like it's time to have field trip to Colorado, from Colorado to Rochester. Yes, field trip. Would love to come over. Perfect. Any other questions that I can answer? My background, anything else, AR, VR, love it. Thank you so much. Thank you. This was an honor to do this. Could you see this also being used for initial testing, such as, yeah, I could. I mean, it just depends. I think we're taking not baby steps, but we're trying things out, right? So we want to make sure the technology is good to leverage before we expand.
What is AFOQT?
The AFOQT is the qualification. Oh, Zach, you asked that. Yeah, I could see that pertaining to training and maybe learning about all the aspects of Air Force. So there's tests that you have to take prior to coming in for enlisted. So yeah, exactly. So I could see that, Zach. Considering it's all about education and training, I could see that, but they would have to adopt it, right? So the Air Force would need to adopt it. What types of tasks do space ops officers do day to day? Such a good question. It depends. It depends on what your mission is. So when I was a space operator and I dealt with satellite communications, it was very much being on console, right? Because you don't have a satellite here on Earth. It's all up space. So you have computers that control the satellites, right? And with multiple security aspects and everything. So basically, it's a lot of learning of what all the numbers on your screen mean, because you want to make sure that your satellite systems are healthy and that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. So at least for satellite communications, that's what your day-to-day is, to make sure that, hey, you're on console, you're on screen, you're looking at your satellite systems, you're talking to your satellite systems, meaning sending commands, and just making sure everything is running well. So including if there's any issues on the ground sites, because we need ground sites to talk to our satellites, we want to make sure that those are running and are doing well as well, right? So just a plethora of different aspects of a day-to-day, but mostly being on console. Great question. Perfect. Awesome. Any other questions? Well, again, this was great. Definitely honored. Oh, I think I heard one.
Oh, no, I was just saying I think we're also pretty much finished. Yeah. So thank you very much. This was a great talk. Thank you, Lieutenant Colonel Stephanie Raffo, for joining us this morning. We're very grateful to learn about your work. Thank you also to everyone who attended today. If you'd like to continue following Lieutenant Colonel Raffo's work, please follow her on LinkedIn. Info is in the chat. Please also check out the rest of the Voices of XR speaker series. Our next speaker is Anurag Kumar, a research scientist and technical research lead at Meta Reality Labs. He'll discuss his work on reference-free learning for speech enhancement and assessment. That link will also be in the chat. And thank you all for coming, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thanks, everybody.
So much.
Thank you.
Thank you.